Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our, it is the afternoon actually. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our first festival session of the day today. This is the Festival of Trusteeship from Eastside People. I'm Penny, I'm the festival director. And before I pass over to Sapna, who's chairing this session today, and the panel, I'm just going to give you a few bits of housekeeping. So the session is being recorded. If you have booked this session individually, you'll get the recording within the next day or so. If you are a weekly pass holder, you're going to get all of your recordings when the festival ends. You've been automatically muted on arrival. Please stay on mute unless Sapna comes to you for a question. Please note that if you unmute, you will be on the recording, so don't do it if you don't want to be recorded, please. Closed captions have been enabled at our end. If you'd like the subtitles or closed captions, you need to click CC or closed captions on your device. Please feel free to use the chat. We'd love to hear you introduce yourselves. We'd love your questions, your reflections, your experiences. Having said that, festival chats can get very, very, very busy. And if the chat is a distraction to you, please feel free just to completely ignore it. The chat is included on the recording, so if you want to catch up later, you can do. And when we take a question from the chat, Sapna will always reread it in full so that you don't need to be listening to the chat for it to make sense. If you don't already have one, you can still purchase a weekly pass for the festival, which gives you access to all 15 sessions and their recordings. And a huge thank you to the Institute of Leadership, who is our headline sponsor this year. It's thanks to their help that the festival is so accessible. And this morning we hit 2,000 bookings. So it really shows how important their support is. And thank you also to this brilliant collection of organisations who've supported us so well, and we literally couldn't do it without them. A couple of other bits of housekeeping. Please note that this session is very much in the public domain. So just think about what you're sharing in the chat. I know this could be quite a thorny issue that we're talking about today. Please don't share anything that you wouldn't want in the public domain. And I don't think we are going to be talking about legalities particularly, but just a note to please check local rules. If the panelists are talking about England and Wales or Scotland or Northern Ireland, please check the local rules for where your charity is based. So thank you very much for coming, and I'm going to pass over to Sapna.
Thank you, Penny. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session. I'm sure, like many people, I'm really glad to see the Festival of Trusteeship back after its brief hiatus and in its new home. We've got a very typically Festival of Trusteeship juicy topic today, challenge accepted, how to disagree well on boards. And I've got a really fantastic panel with me. So I'm going to kick off. For those who don't know, my name is Sapna Marwaha. And this is my third time presenting at the Festival of Trusteeship, so I'm really glad to be back. I am a consultant and I work with universities and non-profits on diversifying boards. I'm going to hand over to our panel to introduce themselves. I'm going to start with Debbie, if that's all right.
Thank you. I'm Debbie Denyer and I'm Chair of Trustees for Caudwell Youth. And also an independent committee member for the Customer Services Committee for Hexagon Housing. And previously was Chair of Trustees for a tiny charity, a volunteer-led charity called Career Springboard. So I've got a bit of experience across different kind of sizes of charities, and I've worked in the not-for-profit sector for about 20 years and run my own coaching and facilitation business.
Thank you. Julie?
Hi, I'm Julie Browne. I'm chair of the charity Women in Prison. We're a national charity which operates out of London, Manchester and Surrey. I've been on the board for 4 years. It was my first trustee position, and it was a baptism of fire into charity trusteeship because 6 months later I was vice chair, and then 2 months after that I was in like a co-chair position, and I've been chairing on my own for the last 2.5 years.
Thank you, Julie. Stephen, do you want to come in?
Certainly. Good afternoon, everyone. Lovely to be here. I'm Stephen McCann. I'm the founder of MCG Consulting. We specialise in addiction and mental health in the workplace. I'm the deputy chair of the board of trustees for ReachOut, a national mentoring charity that work with 11 to 14-year-olds from underserved communities. I also sit on the Lord Mayor's steering committee for This Is Me, the mental health initiative in the City of London. I'm a magistrate. I also sit on the Supporters Association of Arsenal Football Club, as well as the Arsenal Food Bank. So I do a lot of varied work, and I'm passionate about all of it, and varying, as you can imagine, different levels of efficiency across different boards. So lovely to be here.
Thank you, Stephen. Fran?
Lovely to be here with you all. I'm a relatively new trustee at a small charity called Radical Recruit, and I was a small charity CEO for 13 years, and I run my own business, Heart-Centered Leaders, where I provide leadership coaching, facilitation, and training to charity leaders.
Thank you, everyone. I'm sure you agree we've got a fantastic panel today. So as Penny said, we're welcoming your questions. So feel free to stick your hand up or pop your questions in the chat, and I'll be keeping an eye on that as we go. But I will start getting us warmed up with a few questions of my own. So the first one I wanted to go for was, I often say to boards and organizations that I work with that the charities where your trustees nod everything through with absolutely no discussion are just as dysfunctional as the ones who can't agree on anything. And so I'm interested in your experience of, reaching that healthy balance, or perhaps not reaching that healthy balance. What stories have you got of your experience of trying to hit that balance? Okay, Debbie, I'm going to kick off with you on this one.
Okay, so I've worked with a number of boards over the years in various roles. So I had a board that I was working with that was really disengaged, and they kind of nodded everything through, and didn't read board papers. None of the actions got delivered, and I know that that's quite a common issue for boards as well. And actually, it really stemmed from a place of people being fearful of speaking up. It stemmed from that kind of fear of conflict, due to there having been a more kind of vocal board member who had kind of overruled things in the past. So the board had become really disengaged, and it was really that they didn't have their voice heard. They weren't having an input into decisions, and therefore they weren't committed to any of the decisions that were being made, and therefore avoiding accountability as well. So just nothing really kind of happened as a result of it. So it was kind of going back to the start and really working with them to build that trust as a board, to make it a safe space where you could have those conversations, and to help them see that each of their voices were valued, and working with the particular board member who was more vocal, and they were vocal because they were passionate, but that their approach came across quite often as quite blunt and rude to other people, and they weren't aware that that's how they were perceived. So supporting them through that process.
Thank you, Debbie. Yeah, I think that's a really important point. A lot of people aren't aware of their impact, whether they're being a big voice or a very small one, and the impact that that's having. Fran, do you want to come in on this one as well?
Yes. So when I was a rather naive new CEO, I was reporting to a rather homogenous board of 9 white retired gentlemen, and I used to think of them as nodding donkeys. And actually, the situation here was that there was too much trust in the chair, who was also the founder. And, they almost saw him as a quasi deity. So, they were so overawed in all the great work he was doing, they would approve everything. But that really squashed any kind of healthy debate or challenge. It meant that they weren't able to see risks before they were right in front of them. So I remember being quite new, and the annual accounts and annual report had been filed late the previous year and were just about to be filed late the second year, but nobody knew because those issues weren't discussed. And it sounds quite funny now, but the chair would, when it came to the finance report, he'd go, "Oh, hold on a minute." And he'd rush out of the building to the cash point machine and print off the balance and come running back in. And that was the finance report. So if I fast forward now to the board that I'm on, for one, I mean, diversity, I think, is at the heart of having diverse perspectives. And, about a half of our board is from the LGBTQIA plus communities, a third of the board are people of colour, and we're just putting together a youth panel to ensure that the service user voice is centered. And you know, it's so different because there's a culture of curiosity and this feeling that we're all learning together, and the relationships as well. There's trust between the SLT and the board. So, I mean, it's a joyful experience to be part of.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Fran, because I think it's the, you know, we talked earlier about trust, but actually you're kind of talking about when trust goes a little bit too far, and actually too much trust is in one person, and we're not taking the moments to actually pick that apart a little bit. Okay. The next thing I wanted to say was, you know, I think when you're starting to bring about those changes that you're talking about, I think, Debbie, you were talking about transforming a board really from a place of being very homogenous in the beginning. You know, it can be very hard to be the first dissenting voice or to be the only dissenting voice in the room, the person who's saying, actually, I see this from a different angle. So I wondered, Stephen, do you want to come in on this one? You know, what is that experience? Has it felt like for you if you've been the dissenting voice or if you've seen another dissenting voice in the room? And what do you think we can do to make that more comfortable?
Thank you, Sapna. Yeah, I'd be delighted to. Fran and Debbie, great points on yours. I mean, I give a lot of thought about the emotional reality of governance, and I often talk about how psychological safety is a governance issue, and that is really how you can have conversations either flourish or just, you know, the nodding donkeys is great, but silence is a real risk, and clarity is more important than speed. And I'm sure we've all sat on meetings where things are moving through like a freight train, and people feel that they can't talk, but I often say to especially people entering being a trustee for the first time that we're stewards, we're not spectators, you know, and there is fear there, and of course much of it flows from the top. But to your question, being a dissenting voice, in my opinion, has never really been about the issue itself. It's been about the culture of the board and if it allows uncertainty. And people often fear, especially in the climate now, it feels like that you can be seen as being disloyal or experienced, and dissension, even that word dissent, for me, it's quite a loaded term, you know. And for me, I think that, you know, I've seen trustees not feel that they've been psychologically safe to make, you know, to make a dissenting comments, if you like. I've seen that a number of times, but when I've done it, I've been very explicit about the intention. So I'm asking this question to protect the mission. I'm not trying to undermine it. And I think good chairs, and I'm the deputy chair, good chairs allow the conversation to slow down so assumptions can be explained. And that those challenges really, for me, on a personal and board level, I found that has strengthened trust rather than weakened it. And I think that that's something to really bear in mind when you are making these points, because it is easy to have your little moment to say it, and then it passes and you think, oh, do you know what, I'm just going to leave it. But actually, you know, it's our role. It's our role to ask these questions. And not even that long ago, I've had trustees saying that, you know, they were considering stepping back, or that they don't feel heard because of the culture of the board. And as I often say, you know, it's stewardship that we're doing. We're looking to protect the mission, and if people can't say I'm unsure, then the board is already making conversations in the dark. And yeah, I'm all about, you know, empowering others, and as a deputy chair, I try and be mindful of that. But when you're green and new, it can be hard. But just remember, you're a trustee for a reason, and whatever experience you've got is valid and should be listened to. And if the chair isn't doing that, then, you know, make it known. And, you know, the chair is as much of a servant as you are. I hope that's helpful.
That is, thanks, Stephen. I think that's a really important point, that, you know, it is not just important for us to speak up when we've got a different opinion, but it's for everybody else in the room to treat it with curiosity and to help us unpick it and to get to the why before we move on. Julie, do you want to come in on this one as well?
Yeah, I think with me and on my board, I think we've created, I think what Stephen was saying about creating that psychologically safe space. Because I think, you know, the best discussions come when people are able to think deeper and challenge each other on what their question is. And I think I've been able to do that by creating that, like, an environment where people do actually question. And as part of our agendas, I pose the agenda item on the board paper as a question, as an incisive question. So, you know, what assumptions are we making about the financial report that we're getting? So actually people are not just agreeing with this is the information that we're being given. Actually, you're being asked to challenge it, and you will be given a chance. Everybody in that room will be given a chance to speak. Because I think sometimes as trustees, if you're in a space where there's a couple of people that are dominating it, even if you feel that something's not right, if there's always every meeting with 3 people, they carry it, you won't feel safe to speak up, and you'll just let it slide, even if it's making you feel uncomfortable. But if the question is posed to you where actually you're thinking about it in a challenging way, even though it might not necessarily need challenge, you'll be more likely to have the confidence to speak up. And I think as a chair, it's about us creating that space and acknowledging actually if someone is dominating, how we can create space for everybody to feel that they're safe to speak up, that it's not lonely, there's camaraderie with the rest of the board. And even in my early days, I used to sit down and think about ways I could pose questions if I wasn't sure about something, like, actually, can I explore a different angle on what you're saying there? Just so it's not really me coming in and challenging, I don't agree with that, this is why we're doing this. It's actually, I'm just trying to explore a bit more about why we're making this decision. And that's maybe a way to be comfortable to speak up, but actually not make people get their back up who might be on the board, especially if you're a new trustee on the board, because I think it can be so difficult to speak up when you've not been in those spaces before.
Yeah.
Thank you, Julie. Yeah, I think prompt questions can be a really useful tool in sort of turning that assumption around whether we just nod it through or not, and actually putting the onus on everybody to have something to say instead of to reach for it. Thank you. So we've talked a little bit about how we put trustees and each other at ease. I wanted to talk a little bit about putting executive teams and staff at ease, because I think when an organization doesn't have that internal culture of curiosity and challenge isn't always that welcome, or it can be met with a little bit of defensiveness, that can also be a challenge for a board, because it's not just you're not the people they're with every day, and you don't want to come in and be the people that they are nervous to see once a quarter. You want it to be a constructive relationship. So I want to talk a little bit about what trustees can do to help put their executive teams at ease, to help this feel like a norm for them as well as for the other members of the board. I'm going to start with Debbie on this one.
Okay, so one of the things that you're taught when you become a coach is not to ask why. And that's because if you say to someone, well, why have you done that? It immediately puts someone on the defensive. And so if you say, well, what contributed to that, or how did that happen, or whatever, you're opening up the conversation rather than making it kind of blaming conversation. So I think a key thing is ask what, how, when, rather than why, so the person doesn't immediately go into kind of defensiveness mode. The other thing that we've really done is we've really started from a place of working with the exec team to say that the board is there as support and stretch and kind of challenge for you, and use us as that tool. So bring proposals to us at the early stages when you're working through those ideas. And we, it might be that you do that as a PowerPoint presentation and a discussion rather than a paper, because then you've not got so invested in that particular one idea. Come at that point where you're thinking about it, and we can use that session so that we can kind of give you some of that challenge in a way that will help you to develop the idea better for when it comes back to board as well.
Yeah, and Debbie, that can be really important as well when you've got very small organizations where there's not a lot of people to bounce ideas off of. Actually, seeing your trustee team as that extension of the broader team. Okay, Fran, do you want to come in on this one too?
Yes, I'm just remembering horrible situations of facing a board where it felt really daunting, and it could feel quite an adversarial kind of culture. And, you know, I think it's important for trustees to remember that often it's like, can feel like 10 to 1. And, you know, if you don't know your trustees very well, some of them may come from big commercial corporations and, you know, speak a completely different language from your small charity, the way you're used to describing issues. And so I think there's a language problem there as well. And then there's an inherent power difference because, of course, at the end of the day, you know, they hire and fire. And also they have the power to take your strategy in a certain direction, or so it's quite high stakes, I think. And so prioritizing, strengthening relationships, I think is absolutely crucial for all boards. And I know boards are extremely busy focusing on compliance and governance and risk and all these different issues that can often feel very urgent. But I would say that strengthening the relationships outside of the board meetings, you know, allowing an environment where everybody can understand each other's strengths, where you encourage the executive to think about how can I get the most out of my board? How can we work together as a partnership? It's really important. And then there's a phrase I use in SLT board relationships workshop called radical candor. Some of you will come across. It's Kim Scott's theory, and she talks about caring personally and challenging directly. And you know, there were some trustees with beautiful ways of wording questions. Julie, you gave a few great examples there. So really, when you're having to make a challenge, you want to do it courageously and directly, but you want to be really mindful about the language you're using. And then thirdly, I think trying to, as far as possible, avoid ambushes. So, you know, if the papers are circulated a week in advance, inviting questions from the board so that the executive are kind of prepared and can give their best answers. Most of us don't do brilliantly if we're put on the spot. So, you know, trying to keep our egos in check as trustees, which can sometimes get a little out of hand, and reminding ourselves of our intentions for the executive, our intentions for the organisation when we're asking those questions.
Thank you, Fran. I think a theme that keeps coming up as we're talking is that sort of those underlying relationships and how important they are. And one of the things I've been reflecting on is that actually, you know, when I first joined a board, we were meeting 4 times a year in person and getting to spend, you know, at least a night or, you know, a day together, and how we build relationships now, whereas on the boards I'm on now, on average, we see each other once a year. So how we build those relationships has changed quite dramatically. And so I wonder if anyone wants to share some insights in terms of how, you know, the relationship building between boards and both each other and with the teams in the organization has changed. Julie, do you want to come in on that?
I mean, I definitely think obviously the relationships has changed, but I started on a board in COVID, so it was all virtual for me initially, and then we've now gone to this hybrid model. One of the things the CEO used to do was invite trustees to the all staff meeting so that we could meet and understand the organisation on a wider level. So you could pop in if we want. At the moment, we do something called a lunch and learn, where they'll put on every quarter, they'll come and present, staff will come and present, the senior leadership team will come and present, and they'll tell us about what's going on so we can try to build those relationships. Me, myself as a chair, every 6 months, I'll have a little one-to-one with the senior leadership, so I can build my relationship on my own with them outside of the CEO, because obviously sometimes if the CEO doesn't have a great relationship with the SLT, you're only hearing about their relationship through their eyes, when actually it could be a lot different. For myself, with my trustees, we have one-to-ones every quarter as well, checking in, and then also it's the annual review that I'll do with my trustees to say, you know, this is what you committed you were going to do last year. How do you think you've got on? What do you think we need to do differently? Reflect on me, like how do you think I'm chairing? How am I doing as a chair? What more do you think I could be doing? How can I help you? So I suppose, again, it's trying to be able to fit in those little pockets of time to build those relationships, and then create those environments. And then within our board meetings, we use the thinking environment, and that's created a relationship now where we make much better decisions. Our meetings are more purposeful. And as I mentioned before, it's using the questioning for the agenda items, but obviously everybody knows that they're going to get a chance to speak. No one's going to interrupt them. We use a round system. So, I'll do a check-in with everybody, something light-hearted, start the board meeting up with like, if it's like been summer holidays, what did you get up to? Name one thing you got up to over the summer, which you really enjoyed. And then we'll go into we're going to go into the governance bits now. And then from that, it's, okay, everyone's going to have 2 minutes to speak on whatever the question that we've posed, whatever we're exploring. And then we'll keep doing the rounds until we've had good discussion. And I think when people know that they're going to speak without getting interrupted, that they can just free flow with their thoughts. They're not going to be exactly rushed in it. They are more likely to challenge, and there's more likely to get away from that group think where everyone's just going to say, yes, this is okay, this works, because actually I'm listening to what she's saying. I'm actually listening. I'm not just listening, but getting ready to say what I want to say and not hearing what somebody is saying. Because I think all too often, we say we're listening, but we're not really listening. We're preparing to just speak over the person that said what they said. So I think it's really important for the chair to create that environment for people. And I think it's transformed our board. And when I do those feedbacks, everybody has just commented on how they really enjoy that environment. And they know they have to read the board papers, because we're not going to go over what's written in the papers. We're going to question it. And that's what we're coming to this space for. And I had a couple of trustees in particular that I'm so happy that I know they read the board papers now, because when they get that space to talk, they want to bring something beneficial and worthwhile. And it took me a long time to get there, but I'm like, yes, I'm going to celebrate that.
Thank you, Julie. We've got a follow-up question for you from the audience. So David has asked, does meeting with the exec risk undermining the CEO, whose role it is to manage the rest of the exec? And was that a concern that came up when you implemented that change?
No, because I think me and the chief executive had discussion, and we felt that it was important that I have a separate relationship, because there was a time when she was having a negative relationship with someone, and she wanted me to get my perspective on whether or not it was her, or if it was something else that was going on. I also prepared questions that I was going to ask when I first met them, and I shared them with her. This is the sort of things that we're going to be exploring, so it wasn't going to be any surprises. And when we had our one-to-ones, I'll say, I met with this person, and this is the sort of things we talked about. I'm so excited, everything you said they were going to do, they're like so on board, they're so passionate about it. So I think as long as you've got those open lines of communication, and you're not necessarily just going behind your CEO's back with it, it can benefit. Because then I think when she was having those challenges with some of the staff, and especially with us launching a new strategy, I was able to say, well, maybe you need to think about approaching it in a slightly different way based on the information I've got from that person. I don't see it necessarily the same way, or if it was, we were on the same page.
Thank you. Yeah. Does anyone else want to come in with an experience of maybe where they've met a bit of challenge as they've tried to establish a relationship with the wider team? Stephen, you look like you might have something to say.
Yeah, Julie's points are fantastic. And what really helped me was that, I'm the deputy chair of the Board of Trustees for a national mentoring charity. I'm also the only person on the board who's also a mentor myself. So I go into the classrooms, I do the work with the young people, and that has given me so much insight. And that is a privilege to do that, because I have X amount of time per week that I can spend on that. But it's also given me an understanding of the amount of effort that goes into it from the organisation side, the amount of care. And there are things that you can't see on a report or an account. You just can't see what the human effort is and the care and all of that. And as a trustee, I found that to be incredibly helpful. And I post on LinkedIn about the organisation, and I run marathons, and I try and be as visible as I can. I also try and help the other teams within the organisation, be it network development or fundraising, and that's really helped me. Has a CEO found that to be? No, they've always encouraged that. They've always encouraged that, because you know, trustees once upon a time decided to join this organisation in this role to help. And, you know, we're stewards and we are here to help. And it's something that, you know, we're very passionate about, you know. And on the other side of the spectrum, I sit on the Arsenal board where we're all fanatical, irrational football fans who get far too involved in everything all the time. And that's just not how you're meant to do it. But anyway, that's another conversation probably. But I do find that getting the and also there are people that frankly aren't as engaged as other trustees, like, you know, and they will that becomes apparent quite quickly, not just in the questions that they ask, but they just don't understand really, you know, that. And it's there's more to a trustee than just making the hard decisions and doing that type of advice. For me, I'm always been so involved, and I find it a privilege to be a trustee, but also to be a mentor as well, because that gives me insight that I would never get. And I frequently in organizations say, you know, let's pretend there was a trustee sitting here. I'm sorry, a mentee sitting here right now. Would they be comfortable if we describe them as the following? And that can really give a wonderful bit of insight, because people will, and I have, they've stopped and said, oh, gosh, you're right. That's interesting. And let's think about it like that. So I try and do as much as I can in that respect.
Thank you, Stephen. Julie, everyone is very curious about the techniques that you've shared. So we've got a couple of questions here. Can you provide an example of how a questioning agenda might work? And also, how do you manage to enforce a 2-minute rule?
So I'll start with the 2-minute rule. In the early days, I used to have my virtual, my phone, and use that to do the timer. Sometimes it's 2 minutes, sometimes it's 3. It depends on the agenda. So when we're planning the agenda and how many items we've got to get through, and then looking at all the trustees that are on the board, then trying to see how much time we can give some people. Obviously, not everybody will use all of their time, and then that time can go over. What's happened now is, I think, because everyone's so used to using this technique now, I don't have to time people. They naturally know, okay, when I say, okay, we're going to go around, you've got about 3 minutes, they naturally know, and they usually come to a stop without me even intervening. And then with the agenda, like, for instance, our operational report, I would pose a question like, what is this operational report telling us that we need to be mindful about regarding the organisation? And then that might start a conversation about risks or impending challenges or horizon scanning or something like that. So I'll go through, when I'm doing the agenda setting with the CEO, we'll go through and we'll look at, okay, what we got to talk about, and then look at how we can pose this into an incisive question to get the people on the board thinking about what we want, like, get them questioning and exploring. Usually from that, other questions will come up as well. And then obviously everybody knows they've got to wait for their next round to come up to say that, because it's really important that everybody knows that this is an equitable space and everybody has to have an opportunity to speak. And I think because we did have some dominant voices, and because everyone's got used to this method, it finds that we don't usually have people that dominate now, because everybody already knows they're going to get a space. But I think we've been using this for 2 years now, so it's taken us that amount of time. And before I introduced it, on my chair's report that goes out with the papers, I did do an overview of, this is what it is, this is what I'm trying to do. We're going to give this a try and see how we get on. And obviously it had its challenges the first time as well, because I was still quite new to this Nancy Klein thinking environment, but then I've been able to learn and progress it as we've gone on. And I just wouldn't go back. I think I use it in my day job. And I just think it's really transformed the board meetings.
Thank you. Thanks, Julie. Another question has come in from Ian. I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. He's talking about trustees not reading their papers basically being a barrier to engaging in the debate. And do we have any tips for how we persuade our trustees to get a bit more engaged and make sure they've read things before they get in the room? Debbie, I'm going to take this one to you, because I think you talked earlier about sort of a transformation of a board.
Yeah, so I mean, for me as a chair, it's about having individual conversations with those people to understand what are some of the barriers there. So you know, having a discussion about, you know, is it something to do with the papers and the way in which the papers are formatted and the structure of the papers themselves? Is it that there's, you know, that, you know, they don't feel that their voice is going to be heard, they've not got an opinion to give on something? Is it that they don't know the right questions to ask? one of the things that we've done in the board that I'm on now at Caudwell Youth is use Julia Unwin's 5 S's of governance, and talk to the board about so their kind of strategy, scrutiny, support, stretch, and stewardship, and talk to the board about what are some of the kinds of questions that you could be asking under each of those headings, in relation to kind of board papers coming through. And we did some kind of examples of, okay, if this were to come, what might be some questions that you might want to be asking under those kinds of headings. So sometimes it's that, you know, people don't read it because they don't think that they're going to have an opinion on it, or it's not formatted in a way that makes sense to them, or going back to that whole point about you know, this kind of not feeling that they can be heard, that kind of safety in the meeting itself. You know, quite often, so I've done work with some bigger boards of much larger organisations, and sometimes they have, you know, literally hundreds of papers. And so, you know, do those board papers need looking at? Can they be condensed down? Does all of that stuff need to be going through the board? Are there different committees that could be focusing on different areas? And, you know, can you use executive summaries? Can you use dashboards? What can you do differently? So I think it's, for me, it's about understanding what are the barriers, and having those conversations with people, ideally individually if you can, because they'll probably be quite different for each different person.
Yeah, Debbie, I think that's a really important point, looking at the whole cycle, because sometimes it can be that you're getting 100 pages to read on a Friday for a meeting on a Monday. And sometimes it can be, actually, you've had them 2 weeks in advance. It really draws a different perspective. Stephen, do you want to come in on that one too? Any top tips for convincing your
I think
board?
I think don't assume that everyone can access the papers, and don't assume that everyone knows how to use the share drives and so on. And I say that because I've actually been quite shocked that X amount of weeks into a conversation, someone said to me quietly, because I try and be very kind, they say, where is this? I don't know where this is. I know people that haven't known that they've had a specific email address for things like this, and that all goes to the culture. If the culture is the one that we want, people will say, look, I'm so sorry, I can't, where is it? Oh, it's in at, etc. And that's easy. But if you're of a certain age, you already feel like a bit of a Luddite sometimes, and you don't want to say, I'm so sorry, I don't know what, where that is. So maybe, so many people are very au fait with shared drives and OneDrive and all of that, and that's great. But there are people that are not. And I think people might be surprised, but at the level of people's IT competency sometimes, certainly those that are trustees that have been out of the working world for a while, I think I try and just always say, has everyone read it? Does everyone know where it is? For those of you who need a reminder, it's here. Things like that, I think can be very helpful and inclusive.
So I think we've had a related question from John, which says, if people aren't reading the board papers, is there an argument for changing the format? And I think what's come across from those comments is yes, absolutely. Sometimes you do need to attach it as a PDF to an email instead of putting it on the shared drive. Sometimes it does need to be a presentation instead of a 20-page paper. Another question that's come through is, what is the experience of flat organizational structures, and how does that impact? Now, I think there'll be lots of people here who are in sort of very small organizations, and it can be a relatively flat structure. Does anyone want to come in on that one?
So I previously, as I said, was chair of trustees for a very tiny charity, which was a volunteer-led charity. So the executive committee was also the trustees, and they did everything. They ran absolutely everything. And so, and volunteers. So on top of that, you're expecting people to give up their time and energy to be able to do things when they've got other things going on in their lives as well. So it is really challenging. And I think for me, the kind of the real light bulb moment was getting an understanding again of each individual person, understanding what their strengths were, so that you could be playing to people's strengths and not trying to get people to do things that were not playing to their strengths because it was an inefficient use of time. And really going back to the kind of, okay, well, what's the purpose? Why are we here? What are we trying to achieve? And what can we realistically achieve with the resources that we've got available to us? And, you know, are there other, we became kind of good at, which so many charities are good at, kind of using other resources. So we did things like we recruited some students to do kind of internship support to do social media marketing for us. And, you know, that gave them a great opportunity and something to put on their CV. And it meant that we had that support of some young people that knew far more than we did about social media marketing. So it was kind of being much clearer about, okay, well, what do we want to achieve? What can we realistically achieve? What are the strengths of each individual in the kind of team that we've got, and what capacity do people have? And being really realistic about that. And then also making time to talk about what are the things that might get in the way and how might we address those, so that we weren't, you know, because everybody is so committed and so passionate and they want to, you know, they're there for the right reasons. They want to do the best. So they might often quite, you know, over promise on things and then it wouldn't happen. So really spending time in the trustee meetings to kind of say, okay, well, what might get in the way of this and what could we do to overcome that, and how can other people support you in doing that? So yeah, that's kind of how we worked it.
Yeah. So another thing I wanted to come back to, and Fran, we talked about this early on about, I guess when the trust goes too far and when people feel a bit, and you know, I felt this myself, right? I'm a lawyer as a background. And so when certain things, audit and risk things come up, you know, I remember a major sort of contract going through and the only question being asked was, has Sapna read it? And then we were just good. And I was like, no, we actually need to talk about this. And I think there can be this thing where relationships get a bit too tight and, you know, it just becomes the trustee's job or or someone's job in the room. And the question is that person happy with it, rather than, are we all happy with it? So I wanted to talk a little bit about that, sort of how building that collective ownership, and how we get everybody engaged in things that maybe are a little bit beyond their comfort zone and their expertise. Fran, do you want to come in on that one?
Well, I don't know whether this is answering the question, but something pops to my mind where trustees may not have a specialism in finance. And so everybody's looking at the budget and talking in a language that the other half of the trustees don't understand, but they feel a little bit unsure about admitting that their knowledge around finance isn't where they'd like it to be. So I think in that situation, really taking the time to understand where individual trustees might need support and development. And something I was advised by Clarissa Cruz when I became a trustee was that I should view the first 18 months as my induction, to see that as the learning phase. And obviously ask questions, but not to put too much pressure on myself to contribute too soon. So that's the thought that pops into my mind.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And that, you know, we have to say the average trusteeship, the contribution is about 30 hours a year. So actually in that year, you've only done less than one working week at your day job. So giving yourself that grace, I think, is really important. Debbie, do you want to come in that one too?
Yeah, I think also that kind of creating an environment where continual learning as a trustee is the norm. So, you know, so one of the things that we do as part of our kind of, when we get together for a strategy day, we'll do a bit of, you know, team training or team building, so that there's always that continual learning and that kind of, how are we as a board performing and what can we be doing better as a board, kind of questions. So not just accepting that, you know, this is the way it is and this is how it's going to stay, but recognizing that we, all of us at whichever stages in our trustee careers can continue to learn by coming to things like this, which are a great opportunity. But yeah, I mean, one of the other things that we've done with our trustees and our executive team, and actually the whole of the organisation, is personality profiling. So we've used Clarity 4D personality profiling so that we all have a much better understanding of ourselves and each other in terms of, you know, how we think, how we make decisions, how we prefer to communicate, and also therefore where, you know, we might have a few blind spots, and how we might be perceived by other people differently. So I think that's really helped us as well.
We've got another question from the audience. Julian this time is asking, do you think there's any issues that trustees do need 100% agreement on, where you do want that unanimity across the board? Julie, I'm going to come back to you on this one.
Well, I mean, when it comes to signing off policies and stuff like safeguarding, we need to be in agreement on those. I would say we get to a point where, I mean, most of the time I would say we don't 100% agree, but I'll go round and I'll be like, okay, can you live with this? Or is it a dead hard stop? No. And I think it comes to a point, doesn't it, where someone's like, actually, I don't 100% agree, but I'm willing to live with this. And I suppose, and it's like, okay, on what level? On a level of 1 to 10, how comfortable or uncomfortable are you with this? And I think we were nominating some new trustees, and someone felt like ethically one of the nominations they didn't agree with, but we don't have an ethical policy, so we can't discriminate against that person purely because of where they might work for their day job. And I suppose we got to a point, well, she goes, I'm not happy with it, but I can live with it. I can live with it on a 5. I was like, okay, you're not a 10, you're halfway, so I'll take that for now, and then we'll see what we go. So I suppose that's the way that I manage it, in terms of, okay, so where are we? And I suppose if I have had sessions where actually someone's been a hard stop, I don't agree with it, I'm not going to vote for it. I'm not happy with you not taking into consideration what I'm saying here. And then I've gone away and said, what do you need to feel more comfortable with the decision? Is there some information that it is missing? Trying to understand what it is about it if everybody else is agreeing. And if they have given me something tangible and it isn't a decision we actually have to take, I have moved it to the next board meeting in order to allow the staff team time to either gather the information, if there is information questioning, and just give everyone a better chance to reflect, because I think we have 2-hour meetings and we're making some really, really important decisions about, you know, organizations, people, you know, sometimes redundancies, things that affect other people. And we don't always, you know, sometimes a 10-20 minutes discussion is not enough time to really thrash out the details. So I have been known to do that too, and then come back to it, because I'm just mindful that so much power lies in our hands.
Yeah. Thank you, Julie. There can be a difference, can't there, in disagreeing on the what we're doing and the disagreeing about why we're doing it. You know, I think there's a difference between the debate that sits behind it. Stephen, do you want to come in on that one? You're on
Sorry,
mute.
I've only been doing Zoom calls for 5 years. Yeah, I think obviously majority rules, and there needs to be consensus in that respect. But I think, as Julie was saying, things around, for me, around restructuring, that deserves a long conversation, and people need to be comfortable with it. And we've faced that recently, actually, and the charity world often does. And I think that there needs to be a consensus, because the board needs to be as one and support the decisions made. Absolutely. I think it's quite a personal subject to many people as well. So I think that is an area where I would absolutely explicitly ask everyone to contribute, you know, because otherwise, as many boards are, they're driven by, you know, well, this makes sense and let's go. And going back to the silly question thing, I have to stop myself saying this might be a silly question, and I encourage others to maybe just think about it sometimes, because people often say, I'm not an expert, and they laugh a bit and then say, and there's no need, because, you know, you have our respect because you're on the board and you're in that room and you're sitting down. And, you know, I always say that to everyone. I've got a friend of mine who starts every email with an apology. Either the time I've got back, I haven't done this, I've got to do that. And I just say, you know, no need. I've worked in the legal world for a long time with people who never apologized. And they would just occasionally they would say thank you for your patience when they were 2 months late on something. But again, with yeah, it's all about everything. It's all about the culture. It's all about creating the conversation, and the culture is what you see every day. And if you are part of an organization where a thorny issue comes up, you will know that we can all discuss this and and take our time and get to the right idea and the right result. And I'm really excited by a conversation happening like that and the skills of other people. And I look at other trustees as being wow, like people that have done something else elsewhere and now they're here, and you must have seen so many things that I've never seen before. What do you think? And that really empowers people to bring their true selves to it. I remember when I was green and very new, I was sitting there wondering, should I speak? And if I do, what if I say something that's a bit silly? And that's how you just end up saying nothing. So I don't suffer from that now, clearly, but it's something that I've worked on.
Thank you, Stephen. So we've talked about, and Julie, you just mentioned power, the amount of power that is held. And I think in some of the examples earlier that we've heard, we've heard about those loud voices who maybe hold a bit of disproportionate power in the room. So I wanted to ask a little bit about what techniques you've adopted to try and redress those power imbalances and make sure that everybody does get a chance to say their piece. Debbie, do you want to come in on that one?
Yeah, so I think some of the things that Julie said in terms of doing that right at the start of a board meeting, doing a bit of a check-in, so that everybody has had a chance to say something, because that in itself is this kind of like, oh, okay, so I'm allowed to speak right from the start. Say, how was your weekend? Or we used to do like fun check-ins at the start of our board meetings as well. But the kind of the round robin that sort of Julie mentioned, but also for me as chair, my kind of role is to not speak first. And so I will always kind of hold back on my opinion when there is a debate happening. But I will ask questions. So I might say, okay, so what are the benefits here, or what are the risks, what are the alternatives? So I might ask those kinds of questions, or do the, I'm going to be a devil's advocate. What about this? Or I'm curious about this. So I might encourage more discussion in that way. I'll also, we've got some members of our trustee board who are more reflective. And so for them, actually, they will watch and listen to the conversation and kind of be building their reflections on it. And so then I will invite them in to the conversation kind of later on and say, what are your thoughts on this? I'd really welcome your thoughts, because I know that they need that time to reflect. And when they say something, it's going to be absolutely brilliant. But they need that space and time to have that kind of reflection. So very much a case of kind of bringing people in, and recognizing that also it's quite difficult if there's a dominant voice and you are more reflective. It's quite difficult to kind of jump in on that sometimes, and like others have said, the moment gets missed and moved on. And then also kind of allowing that time to summarizing where I think we've got to, so I think we've come to this conclusion. Is that correct? Just making sure that that's where we actually are, before we then say, okay, well, that's the decision that we're going to go with. And I think that, that commitment then to that decision, because you've all made it collectively, it's been debated much better, is really important. And that is kind of like the football coach, isn't it? That they make a decision off pitch about how that football game is going to run and how the players are going to be set up on the pitch on the day. And if they then went off and didn't do that, it would all go to pot. And so whether or not they agree with the decision that was made, they've all had that kind of discussion and whatever during the training, and then they have to go with it. And I think that so there is this kind of thing of as a trustee, you can't then walk out of the trustee meeting and go, oh well, I didn't agree with that, because that just completely ruins everything that has been agreed. And that's not our role.
No. Julie, you shared some of your sort of techniques for addressing the power imbalance earlier, and I wonder if you'll talk a little bit more about implementing it, because you mentioned that it's you know, you're 2 years in now. I wonder how long it took for you to kind of feel that shift and to, you know, for people to get used to that new way of working.
I think it took about probably maybe 3 or 4 board meetings before we got
Okay.
to a place where it became our norm.
So is that a year for you?
Yeah, 4 meetings a year, so probably about a year.
Okay.
As well, with people getting used to, okay, we're not just going to run for agenda, 2 people speak on each item, and then that actually everyone's going to have space here. And I think what also helps is picking up on some of what Debbie said, knowing my trustees, so building those relationships. So when I am thinking about those questions, when I do my rounds, I sort of know what order to go into, to know for someone to open the discussion and know actually I'll go to that person next, and everyone's going to get a chance, but knowing who's going to want to say more passionate about that piece. So I know actually they need to go here is knowing the trustees and then it allows me to make sure that I'm distributing the power and that everybody is there, because obviously ultimately I hold it. And I think it's like what Debbie says, I'll never go first in the round. I'll always make sure that I'll go last. I think there might even been rounds where I've been so involved in just making sure everyone's got it. I might not even have said anything sometimes. But yeah, so I think those elements are really important. And I think my hope is that obviously when I do step down, that they're able to just carry that the format that we're using on, because it just seems to work. It just, you know, in making up better decisions and challenging assumptions in such a positive way. But yeah, and I think as well, another thing that we do, which helps set us up for the next board meeting, is at the end of the meeting, we've done our check-in, we've done our rounds, we've debated, we come to the end, have you have any other business? At the end, we show appreciation for each other. So we'll just show appreciation. So it might be that's like I'll try and do that if we're sitting in a circle next to each other, or my online circle if it's on like Zoom, just showing appreciation for the board, the trustee next to her. That's something that they added. Like, I like how you asked a question about what we're doing about this element of the grant we're doing. I thought that was really helpful. So everyone goes away feeling they added value to the meeting. So when they turn up to the next meeting, that they know they contributed and it's been acknowledged by everybody on the board.
Thank you. Okay, folks, we've got 1 minute left, so I'm going to do a quick round with everyone. What do you think is the most important thing in building that culture that we've talked about, where challenge is accepted and appreciated? Debbie, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so I'm going to steal Stephen's one from him before he gets there. So I think it's about creating that safe space. And for me, that safe space starts with building trust.
Julie?
Relationships. I would say definitely relationships between the CEO, relationship between the chair and their trustees.
Fran?
Curiosity, based on the previous 2 comments.
Perfect. And Stephen?
I've got to think of a new one now. No, healthy boards are not the ones that agree all the time. They're the ones where people can have disagreement openly without fear. And when trustees and executives speak honestly, it really does not just deepen trust, but makes decision making much, much more efficient. And that's what responsible governance protects, I think. And we have to all model that. And you get the organization that you know is a reflection of the board's behavior.
Thank you. Thank you all. Those have been some really great insights, and I think there have been lots of takeaways from everyone to go away with today. I will hand back over to Penny.
Wow, thank you, Sapna, Debbie, Julie, Stephen, and Fran. Another brilliant practical session. Thank you so much. A lot to go away and think about. I want to highlight a few other sessions that are on later this week. So today at 4:30, we've got Trusteeship Transformed, which is 12 people, 12 trustees, pitching ideas that will revolutionise trusteeship. All short pitches followed by an audience vote. So that should be fun. At 6 p.m, we've got a session on young trustees. Tomorrow at 12:30, we've got a session on trustee recruitment. And at 4:30, and I think really relevant to this session, we've got a session behind the scenes, what it's really like to be a charity CEO. And then finally, again, very relevant to this session, at 4:30 on Friday, we've got a session, How Not to Be a Prat on the Board, with the framing that we all have an inner prat, and other sessions. I'm only mentioning some of them. When you come off this session, you'll get a quick evaluation question. Please let us know what you thought of this session. A huge thank you again to Institute of Leadership, Stone King, Fair Collective, and our other partners. And do please check out Eastside People. We offer lots of support to boards around good governance and trustee recruitment. So thank you all very much for coming. And thanks again, panel and Sapna. That was absolutely brilliant.